Hello, and thank you for joining us for the next installment of the Project Management webinar series. Today we have Brett Wood. He is our state surveyor, and he is with our Central Office Surveying and Mapping Office, and he is going to go over some of the basic fundamentals of his office and some of the things they do. So with that, we'll hand it over to Brett.
Thank you, Bobby. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the Central Surveying and Mapping Office. Some of the things I'd like to cover today are related to what we do, how we got here, what direction we're taking, but focusing especially on how we support the districts and how we can support you as project manager. A quick rundown of strategic development. For those of you that may not be aware, we've gone through a significant restructuring. Surveying and mapping, which used to be under the design office, is now under the civil integrated management, which is under the Office of Transportation Technology, and we've been moved under strategic development, which used to be intermodal systems. Some of the other groups that are under civil integrated management with surveying and mapping is the GIS office. It's been created as a separate cost center out from under surveying and mapping, and just recently, and Transportation Data and Analytics, or TDA, has been moved underneath Civil Integrated Management. Also, Civil Integrated Management is sort of the champion for the roads initiative. One of the things I usually talk about when we talk about Civil Integrated Management, so you get an idea of kind of the direction of things as far as data is concerned. One of the fundamental principles of civil integrated management is treating data as an asset similar to our infrastructure. And as you can see from the wheel, there's basically different components that go into data. And this isn't just geospatial data. This is business data and other information. Civil integrated management is simply the principle is basically measuring something once and using the data multiple times. And also, too, the fact that in our normal workflow or in the life cycle of a transportation asset, we collect data on it several times through its life cycle. And if we were to be able to manage that data more efficiently, it would help with a lot of our business decisions in and around transportation. Currently, the Surveying and Mapping Office has 18 FTEs. We're like most of the other groups out there. We've downsized considerably over time. Probably at the beginning of 2000, late 1990s, we had roughly 60 personnel in surveying and mapping. And recently, with the separation of the GIS folks, that's where we get that 18. I think two of us together is around 37, all told. It's broken up, right now surveying and mapping is broken up into basically three sections. Administration, of course, all cost centers have administration and budgeting tasks to deal with, and that's a lot of what we deal with here. We have the benefit of not dealing with production so much as the districts do, but we deal with a lot of other research and development, developing contracts. We do have a central statewide contract, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. One of the traditional, and probably the section that supports design the most, is surveying and right-of-way mapping. The location surveying and right-of-way mapping manager is George Massey, and in that group is location surveying, right-of-way mapping, surveying and right-of-way mapping, and also too the Florida Permanent Reference Network. And that, for those of you, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but it's basically a network of over 100 stations that track GPS and GNSS signals and provide differential corrections for a lot of applications for the department. And also mobile surveying and mapping. And as the name implies, mobile surveying and mapping is basically dealing with sensors in motion. They consist of mobile survey and photogrammetry. Mobile surveying and mapping was the traditional aerial mapping section, which I'll cover a little bit. And Mike Maluda is manager of that section. Some of the main components that we provide in design and also in production or project management would be the support for the policies and procedures in the surveying and mapping handbook. We also perform quality assurance reviews or QAR activities on district surveying and mapping. We help develop and modify the staff hour estimate worksheets. Currently the tabs under surveying and right-of-way mapping is tab 27, location survey. Tab 28 is photogrammetry, is under mobile surveying and mapping. Tab 29, right-of-way mapping, is under surveying and right-of-way mapping. And tab 30, terrestrial mobile lidar, is underneath mobile surveying. So you can see kind of a distinction. Anything that's static or stationary in the survey collection and survey processing realm is pretty much under surveying and right-of-way mapping. Anything where the sensor is in motion, where we're dealing with a trajectory and processing data from a moving platform, comes underneath mobile surveying and mapping. We also support the standard scope, and we also perform the consultant pre-qualifications. Chapter 1475 is the administrative code that supports the pre-qual process, and we occasionally make changes to that as well. One of the other major functions of survey is to provide training to the district. Besides that, we also provide equipment to help the survey groups in the districts to perform various types of surveys. We provide them with training on how to process from the FPRN. In addition to the local survey equipment that we've provided, you can also see there in the upper left corner, there are 3 static lidar collection vehicles. One in the South Florida area, I think it's in, actually it's in Bartow. One here in Tallahassee, and another static van is I believe in your District 5. But basically the different districts utilize it, and they move around and make use of the static van when they're doing some 3-dimensional surveying in support of local district needs. We're coming up on a training session with TopoDot, which is, if you look at the upper right corner, TopoDot allows us to work with LiDAR data along with our traditional CAD as well as photography. So that's another major role of the central office, is providing equipment and training to the districts in surveying and mapping. We also work on cross-functional projects. We've worked with automated machine control. Our main focus on automated machine control was helping develop the best formats for transferring data, such as through an XML file, how to get the surface into the machine, and what formats work best. We've worked on several of those projects, and we continue to work on those as we work on our standards. The permanent reference network that I spoke about, basically you can see the statistics here, and essentially what the FPRN does for us is it allows us to get centimeter level accuracy real time with a single unit. This allows for this supports actually a lot of different mapping functions as far as control, topo, and also too it supports some of our real-time monitoring activities. The Dames Point Bridge and the Skyway, they both have receivers that have been mounted on them, and they track data over time and can determine slight variations in their position. One of the other things that's important to us, and you'll see later in this presentation, is that the FPRN gives a geodetic base for relating all of our surveying and mapping activity. As we know more and more as we move to the future, we need data and information, and the things that we position need to be related to other types of information. And the best way to do that is to get them on a common datum. and the FPRM provides a very dense common datum for putting our DOT infrastructure on. Mobile surveying and mapping, as you would imagine, we do a lot of remote sensing support. We've done projects with mobile surveying and mapping, terrestrial mobile lidar vehicles. We worked on the TAB 30 to create the terrestrial mobile surveying and or lidar mapping standards and tabs. We established standards for other types of collections. We also do some archival of imagery data, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But one of the things that we've had to do is broaden our approach, because as many of you know, the remote sensing technologies have changed tremendously in the last few years, and they continue to change as we move forward. Another element that we provide support in is when we combine survey technologies, you get mixtures of different types of accuracies, different types of densities, but we know that the future of projects at the department, especially in 3D, is going to be a combination of sensors or a combination of survey tools. It's no longer going to be primarily one tool or another tool, and I'm sure a lot of you have already seen projects where you may have mobile LiDAR mixed with conventional survey. Some have even had aerial LiDAR mixed with mobile LiDAR mixed with photogrammetry. These are going to become the norm rather than the unusual. Really quickly, one of the sections we're going to move into is state topographic mapping, and I wanted to give you a little bit of background before we get too far into that. And here's a brief history of the aerial mapping section. We started with John Beasley, those of you that know the John Beasley Award, in 1946. And over time, we developed the capability to collect data and do photogrammetry internally. And for many years, we were the State Topographic Bureau or State Topographic Mapping Office. In 1995, the State Topographic Mapping Office became the Surveying and Mapping Office under the state mandate during FDOT began downsizing. So instead of having a topographic engineer, we had a state surveyor position. And in 2003, we purchased an aerial digital camera, and we made the move from film to digital imagery. In 2016 and 17, you can see we knew that we needed to transition from production into more of a support role that traditionally was really our mission to the department. We had gotten into a lot of mapping because there was a need, but over time there were plenty of consultants that were performing these things, and technologies were changing. So we started looking at, can we support doing the production of ortho photography ourselves, or would it be better for us to branch out and use other technologies? So that we began thinking about how do we phase out the production side of what we were doing. We began with a strategic plan, and we felt that the goal was to focus more on district support, because over the years, the districts had not been getting a lot of support from our group for aerial mapping technologies, how to estimate staff hours on aerial projects, and we felt like that was really one of the things that was hurting the department, was the fact that we were much more valuable in a support role and doing quality assurance and helping the districts deal with their projects that dealt with remote sensing than being tied up in production. So that began the phasing out of the aircraft. It took a little time because we had to set up a funding mechanism to replace that, hence the State Topographic Mapping Support Contract. We currently have 2 consultants on board for statewide remote sensing, and basically that contract has everything in the kitchen sink in it. We can do ortho photography, we can do aerial lidar, we can do hydrographic, we can do just about any type of remote sensing from that contract. And on top of that, one of the things that we used to be responsible for, and another reason why I felt it was time to move away from production, was we provide emergency mapping for the department and for the state. As you can see to the right there, these are two color infrared images that we produced. One was before the flooding in the Swanee area basin, and the other one is afterwards. So we do a lot of that, and we had a consultant fly, I should say, St. John's area during Irma. So one of the concerns that we had was we had one aircraft, one pilot, and one camera, and the concern was that if there was an emergency, sooner or later it was going to happen when either the plane was being serviced, or the pilot was out, or the camera was being recalibrated. The chances of us being able to always be there during emergency situations with limited resources was another thought process that went into the fact that we thought it was better to start outsourcing some of those activities. We have traditionally, and I'll show you that a little bit later, we've had a long history of doing county ortho photography, and we of course wanted to maintain that presence and that effort. So part of the project, or part of the contract, is being used for supporting our traditional Department of Revenue responsibilities. And finally, one of the nice things about moving away from production and more into a broader role was we were the state topographic office, and we still needed that vertical component, which up till recently has been very difficult to have a statewide surface model. And one of the things that we believe would be of great value, along with other agencies, is to look at cost-sharing opportunities in producing a surface model. Our county digital ortho photography program, typically we fly several counties. I think at the peak we were measuring 17 or 18 counties a year. Typically the county ortho photography cycle is 1/3 of the state, so over a 3-year period we get a complete coverage. The accuracy or the resolution now for that imagery is 1/2 foot, meaning that 1 pixel on the ground represents 1/2 foot. We're still continuing to support our partnerships with the ortho photography program, and we also work to quality assure Department of Revenue's imagery. So besides quality assuring our own imagery from our own consultants, we also review and quality assure the ortho photography coming to the Department of Revenue through their consultants. And we also have helped write the Florida County Digital Ortho Photography Program standards. This is a screenshot of the latest standards. We're in the process of reviewing those, but it gives you the image spatial resolution or ground sample distance of 1/2 foot. The RMSE and X and Y is approximately 1 foot, which would be 2 pixels. That results in about a 2.5 foot positional accuracy at the 95% confidence level. And basically we're basing it on the North American data in 1983, realization 2011. One of the problems with not having a surface model is the department has sponsored several projects dealing with various and sundry sea level and tidal issues. And in South Florida especially, as you well know, there isn't much relief. So a little bit of inaccuracy in the surface model can cause a great deal of difficulty in determining where flood stage or where certain disaster flooding will occur. And there were several instances where the biggest issue to doing some of these analyses was that we didn't have a comprehensive statewide surface model. One of the things that you may or may not know about, but currently the legislature awarded a $15 million state lidar collection project to the Department of Emergency Management. And they also have some additional funding. And they're putting together an effort to get lidar coverage for the entire state. And this is a great first step. As we all know that as soon as you take a picture, as soon as you scan the ground, it becomes dated. Over time, things change, and you have to have a continual collection. You can't do it you can't be just once and done. But at least it gives us a starting point. And one of the things that we're looking to do is tie in the ortho photography with the lidar collection so that we can get it hopefully near similar collect dates. This would be the first time the state has really had an accurate three-dimensional topographic map of the state, of the entire state. And these things can be used for a lot of different applications. One of the things that we have problems with in planning that we're recently dealing with is the fact that a lot of times during the planning process, people go on the internet and collect data and sort of piece together a picture of what's out there as best they can from existing information. And a lot of times this information has different accuracies, comes from different places, has different resolution. And when we get to the PD&E, sometimes we may not survey an area that we should survey, or we over-survey an area we didn't need to survey. So one of the things that having a good state topographic map would help in a lot of the planning, because everything would be on a consistent datum. We could look at drainage issues, we could look at environmental issues, and get a much better idea of what's happening in the area during the planning phase, long before we get there with PD&E and design. Also, too, we're working with a lot of partners down in South Florida that are dealing with king tides, where you don't even have to have a storm, but at a king tide, they're seeing seawater come over the seawall into people's yards, and it's beginning to impact a lot of neighborhoods in South Florida. And of course, we know that if we have good surface information, we can certainly design better drainage from our roadways. That's becoming a big issue within the agency, is where do we send the water, especially in South Florida. And being able to do a better drainage basin analysis before getting to some of the farther design phases would help us address this much earlier in the project. As you can see, this is a part of the transportation plan, but basically this is just saying the same thing, that provide better initial topographic data for early points in transportation planning, and being able to, this sort of gives you an idea of the process and where it would be good to get in ahead of the planning part of it. Also, too, we have the contract, and we are working on focusing our dollars in areas where we believe future roads and future infrastructure is being planned. So we basically have to coordinate that. And one of the things that we're trying to work on with our data portal, which you guys may have heard about, is we would like to start getting a map available for the planning department, sometimes the RCI folks, water transportation districts, give you a place to put some of your wish list or places where you see that there would be a great need for data, or it would be beneficial in your processes for having data. And that way we can make better use of our statewide mapping contract. We have the resources to map, and if we can see where a lot of people need the same information or similar information, we could make a collect that would serve more purposes than just, say, one individual or one individual section. So that's one of the things that we want to start doing with the data portal. This is a quick project that we're doing for a planning office. We're going to fly for aerial imagery and aerial lidar, a swath of 1,800 feet for State Road 20 or State Road 70 and US 27. Basically, we're going to collect the major information for planning, and also to try to carry a surface suitable for initial PD&E. But we're trying to do it with as little cost as possible. So we're going to have ground control, but we're going to process it strictly from the FPRN and see how our results compare to the ground control, and see if there isn't a way we can provide a very significant product without the need for laying extensive ground control. And you know, we're looking for ways to automate the process of extraction of features, and we've looked at some machine learning and other activities. So planning project is just another area. Both of these projects, if we already had the existing topographic map, it would probably answer 90% of what they would want to know in this particular project if we had that statewide topographic map at this point. And as I mentioned with the king tides, we're doing a very dense 100 points per square meter aerial scan in South Florida. That project, some of the analysis from that project is going to be presented at the coming Florida Transportation Symposium. And we've done also some testing on multi-ray using different drone processing software. A lot of people have been hearing about drones and how they can do design, and we're getting mixed results. So we've flown an area with a metric camera and an expensive IMU, and we're using the software from Pix4D and other drone softwares to process it, to try and see if the issues aren't either in the fact that the drones don't have the metric camera, or whether it's because the drone software itself has maybe a bias in its algorithm. But we're trying to get to the bottom of whether it's the technique or the software that's the limiting factor. Our gut feeling right now is that it's a weakness in not having a more comprehensive positioning equipment inside the drones, obviously. And another project that we're working on, and hopefully that can support project management in the future, is we're bringing all this information into a spatial data warehouse. And of course, we're looking at ways that you can pull information and know how good the information is, and know what its pedigree is, so that when you just bring up information, it's more than just a picture, or it's more than just a point cloud, but you have access to the survey report or metadata with that, so that you can tell whether or not it can be used for certain applications. A lot of this is hinging on moving to the cloud, and we are in the process of looking at the cloud support services. Some of the agency has moved to the cloud, and we're looking very closely at that as well. So a lot of times in talking about all this data management and all this lidar and spatial data collection and the FPRN and all those great things, we kind of wonder, how does this tie into the department's future, and how is what we're doing maybe in design or in other areas of the transportation sim wheel, does this apply? And I think one of the things that sort of brought this into focus for me is the article and some of the information that I saw when I was researching connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles. Basically, a lot of there's a report done by Riverside, California, that basically talks to the accuracy of the maps behind the connected vehicles or autonomous vehicles makes a tremendous difference in the vehicle's ability to respond and react, and that there's a proportional relationship that the more accurate you have that position of that object in the map, the more opportunity and the more flexibility the car sensor and the car has to react to that object. They even came up with a graph that sort of illustrates it. You can see that in the example they give, if, for example, the map is accurate to 10 centimeters, then the real-time vehicle position estimated to 0.99 meter accuracy is sufficient. However, if the map is only accurate to 0.9 meters instead of 10 centimeters, then the vehicle position must be estimated in real time to an accuracy of approximately 40 centimeters. So basically what it's saying is the accuracy of the map underlying the infrastructure basically is critical to the ability for autonomous vehicles to react and for those to be a viable system. And as we know, when you start talking about lives and property and all those things, you know, the risk there becomes quite large. So if we throw that back into our spatial data lifecycle, which is similar to our sim wheel, but we know that if we're going to get where we want to get with autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, we know that in reality we're going to be managing a dynamic 3D model of our infrastructure, and that obviously the accuracy of that model is going to be significant. You know, not to say that what we're doing with GIS right now is not the best in the direction to go with what we want to do with spatial modeling, but we know that we have to have a system that we can refine over time. So I think a lot of people think that when you say the term GIS, you're thinking that, well, you know, you're talking about Esri, or you're talking about, you know, just approximate accuracies or what have you. But in reality, geographic information systems are much bigger than that. And ultimately, our geographic information system and our data lifecycle for our infrastructure is going to have to be monitored, and it's going to have to be fairly accurate. And it's more than just you know, Google Maps, I guess is the point I'm making. So one thing that you may notice at the bottom, and this is sort of the holy grail of civil integrated management, or trying to meet this dynamic life cycle of infrastructure modeling, is the as-built survey. What we more accurately call it is a post-construction survey. And at some point in the future, we know that we're going to need a post-construction survey, typically done by a consultant that was not part of the original design. Because carrying that forward, if we have that information after it's been constructed and built, then if something gets knocked out and the maintenance office has to restore it, they can update the model, and we can basically carry it forward until we get to the design point again. And so one of the things we know in the future, and one of the things we're going to have to be able to deal with, is handling data through the life cycle of the infrastructure asset, which is really the core of civil integrated management. Really quickly, I threw this out there on UAVs just to let you guys know. We don't have anything against UAVs. We haven't told anybody you can't use UAVs. In fact, some districts have sent us stuff and they've added it to their district-wide contracts and some of their things. The way the department looks at it is it's another tool. And if you're adhering to all the state, federal, local laws, which pretty much you have to do on any contract for anything that you do for the DOT, then that's all that's really required. And the procurement language that they ask to be in the contract is listed there at the top. Basically, some of the districts have, and you may be aware of it, have added more verbiage to this, but essentially that's the main component. The only thing that I would add to this that we've had to straighten out on a couple of situations is if you're inspecting infrastructure, say you're going to fly a drone and look for cracks in a bridge, that's more power to you. If you're going to look at different infrastructure items to see if components do or don't exist, sure. But when you start performing volume surveys or you start doing topographic mapping and you start doing area calculations for ramps and some other things, well, then that comes under surveying and mapping, and the aerial work type for aerial mapping under survey is 8.3. So if you have a consultant that's going to be using a drone for mapping purposes, then they need to be pre-qualified in 8.3. We like to go through it, especially when Bobby first asked me to do a project management presentation. I went to the district surveyors and mappers and said, okay, what's some of the things you could recommend to project managers as they're working on projects from a survey standpoint? I took out all the bad language and came up with just what you see here. And that is basically I lumped these together under communication because they all seem to be related to communication. And we know that that's really important in any type of thing that any type of endeavor. Communication is critical. A lot of times, one of the surprising things I should say is that some of the surveyors, when we were talking to them, aren't always in the scoping or negotiations phase of some of the projects. And then when scoping or survey issues come later, or people say that there isn't enough money to do what they need to do, it's sort of late in the process. So I thought one of the ones that resonated a lot is, we have each district and central office has experts in geospatial mapping, surveying and mapping, and I think it's crazy not to make sure that those professionals aren't at the table when we're negotiating those types of items on a project. So that's one of the key items that they mentioned. And also too, a lot of times project costs or I guess elements in the survey vary greatly depending on the situation. And if we could know what the construction limits are ahead of time, then it would reduce the amount of changes to right-of-way acquisition down the line. I think one of the biggest headaches and project slowdowns is when the right-of-way acquisition has to be changed midstream. I think a lot of it is more on education. I don't know what the background of all project managers are within the department. I believe that they have varying backgrounds. I think the biggest key is again, becoming familiar with some of the surveying and mapping components of a project and communicating with the survey professionals. And with that, I thought I would open it up to some questions. How are we on time?
We're great on time. No, thank you, brother. That was a great overview. It's been quiet. Haven't seen anything come in. Now we have a couple minutes. We can wait and see if anything does come our way as far as questions. As far as, is there anything additional you'd like to share about your experience or anything? Being the state surveyor, some things maybe you noticed that from our group for project management or some of the other groups that, maybe some additional thoughts that you may want to pass along.
I think that we're all here at an exciting time for the department. We're going through management structural changes, but the way we do business, technology changes. We're starting to go towards 3D modeling. And I think all of those things together make it a pretty exciting time to be with the department. I know we all have the challenges of staff, and I think everyone here would agree that the biggest liability or risk to any of our groups right now is how do we get and attract good personnel. We're all struggling with that part of it, and we're no different. That's a big challenge. The types of, for example, I'll say in mobile surveying and mapping, we had individuals that had worked here many, many years and were very experienced in collecting data from photography in a production workflow. Then you need to have them move to a quality assurance workflow where they're dealing with districts and dealing with other people, and a lot of their roles and responsibilities change. And we're like any other group, we've had mixed results. We've had some that embraced that and have excelled. And we've had others that decided they'd rather do something different, and that's natural. So I think the biggest challenge to our organization right now is our people. How do we keep good, motivated, and knowledgeable personnel, especially in our climate where that's becoming, the market is growing so quickly, then it's becoming much more difficult.
Okay, we did have a question. We had $4 signs come in, so I asked back to the questioner to see if maybe we can get clarification. If Scott, if you could maybe clarify what your question is regarding the money, I'm sure we can address that.
Scott Miller.
Yes, so if Scott,
Scott wants more money.
Okay, well, that sounds like we may have answered that. And that's something I know, but I think a lot of the stuff that we are doing with the technology is really neat, and I think we can. I think we all agree there's going to be some really neat stuff out there, especially with all the technology we have in our hands. So,
yeah, definitely. And I just throw out there that if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. If anything, I encourage you, if you're a project manager, to coordinate with the surveyors. We may seem gruff at times, but we don't bite, and I think it'd be very beneficial to both groups if that communication line was stronger and used more often.
That's great. I think we agree too. Well said. And I think that's part of what we're wanting with our webinar, some of our training, to make sure that everyone knows all the resources that they have at their disposal within the department. So, right. Brett, thank you very much for your time. And we will be, as usual, if anyone in your office was unable to join us today, this presentation will be in Learning Curve. I would anticipate probably by the end of the week, and it'll be part of our webinar series. I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.